Hello to you from another newscast at the Edinburgh Fringe, and we're joined by some newscasters who've come to the Fringe to see us. Hello. So this episode of Newscast is going to be a little bit different from some of the other ones we've done this week, because we're just going to have one person sat in the chair opposite me, and we're going to talk to them for the whole hour. But that's okay, because they've got a lot to say, because they actually have power. They've just had dinner with Donald Trump. They have a fairly big challenge coming up in May next year. And all will be revealed when I introduce them after our special bespoke Edinburgh Fringe opening music from the King Singers.
Newscast from the BBC.
He has just compared me to the Fat Controller.
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
This is all for the benefit of Earth.
I'm not personally a huge Sabrina Carpenter fan. I don't think I'm being rude. I like landscapes.
Take me down to Downing Street. Let's go have a tour.
Blimey.
Live from the Edinburgh Fringe.
Not sure if the King Singers will be releasing that as a single, but I don't know. I'd download it. Right, it's Adam here on the Newscast stage at the Edinburgh Fringe. And for this whole episode, we've got a special guest who's waiting in the wings. He's going to come out now. It's the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney.
Hello. How are you doing? Nice to see you. There we go. There we go. Hello.
Oh, that was a nice welcome, wasn't it?
It was a lovely welcome. I was a bit concerned when I heard the warm-up about you warning the audience about the danger of all the swearing that might go on during this session. And I thought, oh my goodness, what on earth has Adam Fleming heard about me? He's obviously had the inside moment at Butte House.
No, it's
have
more...
have you had a bug in there, have you?
I'd have more exclusive stories if I did. No, it's more, I think I'm just scarred by Brian Cox sitting there for an hour.
No wonder.
Also, I was wondering when I said, oh, he's got power, then I should have said something, but he'd like more. But then I thought that would give away who you are, and I wanted to maintain just a little bit of suspense for a bit longer. I've noticed you've got quite a lot of security, you've got a team around you. Can you pop out and see a show at the Fringe in your lunch hour like we've all been doing?
I can, but I have to have security that goes with me. And as you might have seen at the weekend, I was myself participating in a Fringe show, and it got somewhat disrupted by
some protesters.
So
yeah.
it's just part of life.
Oh, so basically, like a stand-up, you have to be able to cope with hecklers. You have to have a
that's
good comeback.
Let's say it was slightly more formidable than the odd heckler of a poor joke on a stand-up comedy night, but nonetheless, a very important point was being made.
Because it was about Gaza. We'll come on to that. We'll talk about that seriously in a minute. But if you were to pop out on your lunch hour to see a Fringe show, like what genre would you go for? Would it be comedy, music, drama, mime?
It would
circus. All are available.
Well, I think it would probably be music, because I love listening to music. It's a big part of my being. But of course, I've seen some pretty serious drama, not least of which was Make It Happen, which starred Brian Cox, and it was, well, I just thought it was one of the most incredible theatrical experiences I've ever had in my life. And
wow, they're going to put that on the poster.
And it was incredibly, and there was, of course, such depth to the script and to the performance, and incredible moments within it.
I mean, is it weird for you, though? Because, I mean, you were the finance secretary of the Scottish Government for some of that period that play is about.
Yes, and I came into office as finance minister in 2007, and the crash took place in the latter part of 2008, and of course we lived through those issues and the implications of those issues. And there's I don't know if I should I talk about some of the moments in the play. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but
spoiler alert. I hate it when people say that. No, go ahead.
There's an incredible moment where Brian Cox, playing Adam Smith, talks about how the hubris that had gone on in the Royal Bank of Scotland had led to the financial crash and then the austerity, and then the awfulness of Brexit, and he railed about how people feel about their standard of living as a consequence of all of that, and it was done with incredible power and force in the performance. And I sat there thinking, well, that just sums up exactly how people are feeling just now, and how difficult for many people they find circumstances today, and particularly around, we use a term called cost of living, but that's what it's all about.
After how many years of SNP government?
Well, we've done our best to try to recover from that, and there are many ways in which we have done so. But we are still living, as you said in your introductory comment, Adam, in a framework set by others, which is the source of austerity.
Which we'll also talk about in depth. I just wondered, though, actually, that's made me think of a kind of a news-related question. I mean, you sometimes hear Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, saying, financial regulation, which came in after the financial crash, is kind of stifling growth a bit. And she's always writing to the regulators saying, can you be a little bit more relaxed? What do you think about that as a tactic?
You've got to take care, because I think what that play demonstrates is that it is very easy for all of this to run away from you, and you can end up with a situation where there is incredible damage done to the lives of ordinary people in our society because of these great decisions that are taken in the hallowed circumstances of the Royal Bank of Scotland's headquarters, but they can have an impact on people's lives, and we're still living with the impact of some of those decisions on people's lives today. So that's it's an approach that's got to be handled with incredible care.
Have you ever had an example as a politician at any level where you've had a policy idea presented to you, and maybe it would create lots of jobs or boost the economy, but actually you turned it down because you thought it was too much of a risk, or the dangers were too great?
I think what you've got to look for in any policy idea is the whole picture. Try to get your best sense of all of the implications, because some things get presented to you as the best initiatives in sliced bread, and then the more you look into them, you think, wait a minute, where's this heading, and what would be the implications of all of this? So you've got to be prepared to be challenging about any of the information put in front of you and some of the analysis. And we get any policy idea that comes to any minister in the Scottish Government has got very rounded analysis about it, but ultimately you've got to look at all the detail and come to a conclusion.
Well, we could do a live brainstorm version of that now, because I noticed Gordon Brown is in the media today saying Rachel Reeves should tax gambling, and then you could use the proceeds from that to eliminate child poverty. Now, the Scottish Government doesn't have powers to put a new gambling levy on. I'm sure you would love them. But, I mean, how would you weigh up the pros and cons of that as an idea?
Well, I think
it's just an intellectual exercise for us just now.
Well, I think there's merit in the idea because, as we all know, gambling can lead to significant negative effects in our society, which can exacerbate poverty for individuals, and they can create significant harm within communities. So therefore, there is a reasonable and legitimate argument to raise revenue from such an approach, which could then be, as long as it's reinvested properly, in measures. And one thing which I saw some of Gordon Brown's comments today, and I thought there was a lot of merit in them as I think about a lot of things that Gordon Brown contributes to policy debates. But one thing he got wrong was to say that child poverty is rising in Scotland, which it's not. It's going down in Scotland. It's going up in the rest of the UK, but it's going down in Scotland because we've made a priority of eradicating child poverty, and we're making progress in achieving that objective.
Do you think Rachel Reeves should go ahead with this gambling levy?
I think it's certainly worth looking at, yes.
That's not a yes, though, or a no.
Well, that's part of my point about you've got to look at all of the kind of rounded analysis and come to your conclusions. So I would look at all that, but I think it's worth looking at. Yeah.
To use a gambling metaphor, you're keeping your cards close to your chest.
I certainly am.
I suppose also though with gambling, though, isn't there an issue? It's like the debate around minimum unit pricing for alcohol, and you're now having a drink, it's just water. No minimum pricing there. Is that actually when you introduce things like a new tax on a behavior, sometimes it can harm the people you're trying to help the most. So people at the lower end of the income scale, where perhaps this is a bigger chunk of their outgoings. You need like a gambling levy. Everyone thinks, high rollers in a casino, but what if it's like a grand playing a slot machine on the high street?
Well, but it's about all the implications, and like your comparison with minimum unit pricing. So I think minimum unit pricing is one of the best things that we've done because it saved lives, and that's been demonstrated and documented by the effect of the policy and what it's actually contributed to. Because It's created a change in behaviour. It's given people. It's made choice on those questions more difficult, and as a consequence, it has led to the saving of lives, and that's a welcome development. And that was the purpose of the policy. So to see the purpose of the policy fulfilled by taking that action is very welcome.
I was just bringing it up because at the time there was an argument about actually, is this going to hurt less affluent people by making something they buy more expensive? That's why I brought that up as an example.
But then it's about trying to make sure that the policy succeeds in changing the behaviour, which is perhaps to consume less alcohol and make better choices.
Right, let's talk about another big news story that's happened in the last few weeks, minimum unit pricing. That's been talked about for years and years and years. You meeting Donald Trump. I don't know if you've got happy memories of that trip. Seems like it was quite fun, actually.
It was, I thought I should do it. And I thought it was an opportunity for me to set out issues that mattered to people in Scotland, domestically and internationally. And President Trump and I had a pretty extensive amount of one-to-one conversation, and it was certainly a unique experience.
We know. Let's see how that went, because we've got Donald Trump's review of meeting John Swinney.
I also want to thank your First Minister who's here. John, would you stand up? John Swinney, who's a terrific guy and loves golf and loves the people of this country. And we really appreciate it. You're really a very special guy. Thank you very much for everything, John.
It's a bit like school assembly, because for people who were listening to that rather than watching it, it's like you're all sat down in this like banks of chairs, and he's behind a rope on the golf course, and he's like, "Stand up!"
Exactly. Well, it was that was part of the unique experience. And I didn't quite expect that element of the unique experience, but so it was an opportunity for me to make my case.
Didn't he say that you love golf?
Well, he said he loves golf, and I think I can understand why he said that, because we talked about golf a lot.
Because you'd pretended to love golf.
No. I think to be completely honest about it, President Trump led the conversation on golf more than I did. I did at one stage show him a picture on my phone of my 14-year-old son hitting a driver on the golf course in Tyree a few weeks ago. And President Trump looked at the picture and he said, your son's got a beautiful swing. So my son was absolutely over the moon when I told him that. But when I recounted this to your peers in the Scottish Media Corps afterwards, one of them said to me, he said, I cannot get over the fact that the First Minister of Scotland has shared his holiday snaps with the President of the United States. So there was a really quite bizarre part to that encounter. But and when I was asked by another journalist who knows me well, when did you suddenly become such a lover of golf? And my response was, I am aware of the game of golf, which I thought adequately summed up. But I've now got...
I mean, it was invented in the country you run.
It was, yes, exactly. And also I've got extensive new experience, because I am now, as part of my range of responsibilities, I am now the caddy to Matthew Swinney, so I'm able to lug around a bag of golf clubs on my son's behalf. He's at last found a use for his father. So
do you two go out and do that? It's like a father-son bonding thing.
Father-son bonding. Well, let's just say I am required to do so on the spare time, but it does actually allow me to get out and get some fresh air.
Did Donald Trump show you anything on his phone, like, I don't know, some text with Vladimir Putin or?
He did not ask me to edit his Truth Social messages or anything like that. No.
What is it like when you sat with him? Because he actually seems like quite a charismatic guy, and even people who maybe are politically very opposed to him or think his behaviour has been terrible come away from meeting him being sometimes a bit starstruck. I'm not suggesting you were starstruck, but actually in person he seems like quite a fun kind of guy to hang out with.
Well, we obviously talked a lot about golf. He was very keen to talk about golf, and
which we're now repeating.
But we also talked a lot about his mother's roots in the Hebrides, and of course that was fitted quite comfortably because I had given him a gift, which I'd asked the Registrar General of Scotland to see if she could find anything in the national records that might be of significance for him. And much to her surprise, she found a handwritten record from the parish of Tong in Lewis from 1853. Now, compulsory registration came in 1855. So in 1853, it was kind of, you were at the whim of whether the minister wrote things down and the book had been kept. So there was a full record of the marriage of Mary MacLeod, Donald Trump's mother's grandparents, in 1853 in the parish of Tong. And I was explaining this to him, and he was really interested in that and how unusual it was for records of that. Well, not unusual. It was a bit pot luck as to whether that record would actually have been retained. And there was also an extract from the census in 1921, which had his mum registered for the first time at the age of 9. So he was really interested in all of that and asked me a lot about Lewis and what was happening, what we were doing to try to help to sustain population and economic activity in Lewis. He asked me about lots of other issues, about the economy, about crime, about how people felt in Scotland, all sorts of different questions.
And in return, as a present, he gave you a bald eagle statue.
A bald eagle, that's right, yes, exactly. Well, here I am. Very, very, very appropriately chosen, Adam, I think.
Your words, not mine. And I mean, was that surprising for you that a world leader of such an important country was asking such kind of granular questions about Scottish life? Like, I can't necessarily imagine, like, I don't know, Xi Jinping doing that.
Well, he was, but I think what it says is that, and I suppose this is part of why I thought it was important that I met him, he's intensely interested in Scotland. So his roots, and I suppose it's no different. When I think about my family roots, my father's mother came from Orkney. I've got a very special connection with Orkney. I listened to my granny talk a lot about Orkney. So I'm not surprised that he's interested in Scotland, because he told me his mum used to come back every year to visit her family in the Western Isles. So it's obviously been a big part of his conversation with his mother, and he now finds himself, owning golf courses in Scotland, connected to the country, President of the United States, and he was, how I would sum him up, was deeply interested in Scotland.
One of the questions from the audience is asking about whether you felt the need to be kind of almost a bit sycophantic towards him, because we all know what happened to Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine when he was in the Oval Office and he wasn't.
Well, when I went into my meeting with President Trump on Tuesday morning, he was dressed as he is in that film you just showed, Adam, ready for the golf course. And I walked in dressed remarkably as I am dressed in front of you just now. And he said to me, you're very smart for today. Which,
and you're like, what are we doing?
Which I thought was the kind of, perhaps the contradiction to the Oval Office experience of President Zelensky. But I thought I'd maybe mischosen my outfit for the occasion. But it was, I basically, how I go about, I know this might sound kind of strange to people who are perhaps even my political opponents. I'm a pretty courteous person. So whoever I deal with courtesy. And the President of the United States, whatever I think about his politics or his views, should be handled no differently than I would deal with a member of the public who I either agree with or disagree with. And so President Trump appreciated courtesy from me, and I appreciated courtesy from him as well.
One of the issues you said you raised was about Scotch whisky. So basically, are you trying to get a special exemption in this UK-US economic deal to reduce tariffs that gets the tariffs on Scotch whisky down to zero?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to do.
But why should Scotch whisky get special treatment compared to any other British product?
I think because it's a unique product. It can only be manufactured and produced in Scotland. If it's not produced in Scotland, it's not Scotch whisky. And I think there's an interesting opportunity, which is, I know is being raised in the United States, because Kentucky bourbon is in exactly the same position. It can only be produced in Kentucky. And part of what the Distillers Association over there is saying is, well, we've got a relationship with Scotch whisky, and it's a relationship whereas some Scotch whisky gets sold into the States, some Kentucky bourbon gets sold into Scotland, but crucially, whisky barrel, bourbon casks are brought from the United States to Scotland in which Scotch whisky is matured. It's a trade that's worth $300 million per annum. And I'm trying to say, well, isn't there an opportunity for us just to carve Scotch whisky, Kentucky bourbon out of all of this and allow the industry to thrive? Because the tariffs just now are costing the industry £4 million a week. Now that's quite a factor. And if I can try to use the connections that we have with President Trump to try to make progress on that question, I certainly think I should try to do so.
And did he sound sympathetic? I mean, it sounds like he might be sympathetic to most things most people ask him.
Well, he listened to my point of view. He asked me to follow up. We're in the process of following that up, and we'll do exactly that.
Oh, just on a whiskey-related news story, only because you're making my mouth water, talking about the bourbon and the whiskey in the barrels, although it was a bit early. I see Diageo, so the big company that owns lots of distilleries in Scotland and lots of brands and lots of different kinds of alcohol actually are talking about they're going to have a big cost-cutting drive over the next few years. Are you worried that could be Scottish jobs that are for the chop?
Potentially, that will be a factor. And then when I put in the fact that there is a £4 million cost per week to the industry, some of that will be falling on companies like Diageo. So, in an environment where businesses have got to look carefully at all of their costs, then I'm conscious that the more I can do to try to help out in the situation, the better.
And I suppose actually a job going in the Scottish whisky industry, it's just so visible and there's such an emotional connection to it that actually you could have a job in another industry, more jobs in another industry going, and that kind of provoke less of a reaction. You've just demonstrated you've got to look after that industry.
Well, precisely, which is one of the reasons why I decided, although there were some people argued that I shouldn't meet President Trump, I thought I should meet him because it was an opportunity to advance those issues. But the point you make, Adam, is a very valid point, that the employment in the whisky industry isn't all located in smaller, rural, more isolated communities, but there is a lot of that employment in small, rural, isolated communities where the loss of one job in a distillery in, let's say, in Tarbert and Harris or in Islay or any of these smaller remote communities, that will be felt more dramatically than the loss of one job in the centre of Edinburgh or Glasgow.
Not to make this an entire kind of like readout about your conversations with President Trump, but just sort of using that as a bit of a framework for our discussion. You also said on the way to the meeting that you would discuss the situation in Gaza. Yeah. Just give me your take on the situation in Gaza now.
Well, I took that opportunity to raise the situation in Gaza, and I think the situation in Gaza is absolutely insufferable. It is intolerable what is going on in Gaza, and the necessity for an immediate ceasefire, the necessity for humanitarian aid to be able to flow is it's just incredibly long overdue, Adam. I described the situation in Gaza as a genocide. I think that is an internationally recognised assessment of the situation in Gaza. And I think as a consequence of that, every single bit of international pressure that can be mustered on the Israeli government to change course must be mustered.
When did you reach the conclusion that it was a genocide? Because actually you referred to the event you were doing on the Fringe a couple of days ago, which got kind of disrupted by pro-Palestine protesters. And then it seems it was after that event you then told journalists that you thought genocide was happening.
Well, I've come to that conclusion watching. It's the only way I could describe what is going on in Gaza just now. I cannot see there is no other rational way to describe the situation in Gaza, and I think that evidence is clear to us all and has been for some considerable time.
Do you think promising to recognise a Palestinian state at the UN in September, if certain conditions are not met by the Israeli government, is a satisfactory response to the situation by Keir Starmer?
No, I don't. I think there should be an unconditional commitment to the recognition of a Palestinian state, because I think it's an essential building block of a two-state solution and a framework for peace in the Middle East. And
whether Hamas release the hostages that are remaining or not?
Well, I think the whole process of the hostages should have been released months ago, years ago, but and that pressure. But what we've seen is that the tactics that have been deployed have not led to that outcome. So we've got to have a peaceful solution that delivers stability for the Middle East, and that's the current arrangements are not doing so.
Right, let's come on to more kind of Scottish political matters. And I read this column you wrote in a newspaper a few weeks ago, which is kind of like your new blueprint for independence, or not necessarily an independence, but securing a referendum that could lead to independence. Give us the 3-point plan, and then I'll interrogate you on each point individually.
Well, what I was making clear in my article is that point number one is that the SNP will fight the election campaign next May, but on a very clear proposition, articulation of the benefits and the merits of independence for Scotland. And I think the current experience that we are having just now and have had for some years demonstrates why independence is a necessity. Secondly, I think the people of Scotland should be able to choose their constitutional future, which is absolutely vital for us to be able to determine our own future. We are a sovereign people. We should be able to choose that. And thirdly, that the best mechanism to...
Hang on, guys. I'm going to take some questions from the audience in a minute, but let's just hear the First Minister's case, and then we can all ask him the questions collectively.
And the precedent that I rely upon about us making, being able to take that decision is the fact that in 2011, the people of Scotland elected a majority of SNP MSPs to the Scottish Parliament, and I'm simply saying, well, if that precedent was good enough in 2011 to lead to the referendum in 2014, let's have the same precedent. Let's apply that precedent in 2026.
So you would that would be based on then Keir Starmer thinking, oh, David Cameron offered a referendum back in 2014 because of the Scottish Parliament elections in 2011. I'll do the same thing again. That's predicated on that.
It's based on the precedent that was established in 2011, which I think is an important precedent that the SNP made that case, secured a majority. We didn't secure a majority in 2016. We didn't secure a majority in 2021. But I'm saying if we want to make progress, we're in a logjam just now. There are people in Scotland who want to have a choice about the constitutional future of our country. I think we should be able to exercise that choice, but we've got to demonstrate that we want to do that. And that's the appeal that I make to the electorate next May.
And you would say to people that voting for another pro-independence party like the Scottish Greens or Alba is a wasted vote in that case?
Well, it's not enough, because we had people voting for. We had a parliamentary majority in favour of a referendum spread across different political parties in the 2016 and 2021 parliaments, and it's not led to a referendum on independence. So I rely on the precedent that was successful in 2011 and delivered a referendum in 2014.
And so just to be clear, that would be a majority of SNP seats in the Parliament.
That's correct.
Yeah,
yes.
not a majority of pro-independence parties added together or on votes. It would be the actual
majority
number
of SNP members of the Scottish Parliament, because that was what triggered the referendum in 2014.
I'm pretty sure it was David Cameron saying, let's put this issue to bed, that triggered the referendum, not really the election result 3 years before.
Well, but fundamentally, I think what's important is that people in Scotland are entitled to have a choice about their future. When we get to, by the time we get to 2030, okay, well,
hang on. So somebody in the audience is saying that, well, now two people in the audience are saying it was a once-in-a-generation thing. Just address that point about the generational thing.
So by 2030, there will be 1 million people who were not eligible to vote in the 2014 referendum. That is approximately 25% of the electorate. By 2030, were not eligible to vote in the referendum in 2014. That feels like a generation to me.
Okay. And some people are about to applaud and some people are complaining. So kind of sums up the situation for you. Guys, I think maybe, shout, as I told you, we're too cheap to have microphones in the audience. So I'll just, if you want to submit a question or a comment, just do it through the QR code and I'll pass them on. We've still got time. On that first point, though, you said about kind of building the case for independence. Does that mean we're going to get a manifesto for what an independent Scotland could do in the next few months? Because I noticed in that article you said, I'll be unveiling some policies, I'm paraphrasing now, that that we could only enact if we were an independent country?
Well, there's in the devolved government just now, I do everything I possibly can do to make Scotland as successful as I possibly can do. But let's take the issue of child poverty. I'm focusing government on reducing child poverty, and I've got a UK government that is taking decisions that on their own analysis, not mine, their analysis, is going to put child poverty up. Now, that is a classic example why Scotland should be independent, because our ability to interrupt and change and redirect the suffering of families in our country because of child poverty will be foisted upon us by a UK government, when we could exercise a different choice, which I think people in Scotland want me to exercise, which is to eradicate child poverty. So there's just one example of why the powers of independence matter for the people of Scotland.
A big thing that has changed since that era is the rise of Reform UK under Nigel Farage. What's your take on what that means for Scottish politics? Because, I mean, Reform is now polling about the same as Labour.
It means that Reform are a factor in our politics. I have to recognise that. I think part of what is driving Reform is frustration with the current model of what's delivering for people and what's not delivering for people. So a lot of what is underlying the concerns that result in people voting for Reform is concerns about standard of living, concerns about how their prospects are going. And I think we need to have the radical change in Scotland through independence that will enable us to address those concerns from people within our own communities and to give them hope that there is the prospect of a better country where we take decisions in the best interests of people in Scotland.
Oh, so you and Nigel Farage are kind of offering the same. Well, it's not the same at all, but you're addressing this. No, you're addressing the same kind of concerns and unease, but in radically different ways. You would argue.
Correct.
So you're the radical.
So what I'm saying is that the circumstances that lead to the difficulties and the challenges that people face in their standard of living just now is a product, frankly, of mistakes that Nigel Farage has taken us into. You know, Brexit has made us poorer, every single one of us, courtesy of Nigel Farage. Now, I want to do something about that. I want to make sure Scotland has got a future as an independent member of the European Union, and we can only achieve that if we have independence.
I mean, a lot of Reform's rise is about concerns about immigration. I mean, do I diagnose that concern amongst the public about levels of immigration?
Well, when I think the UK's made a complete mess of the whole discussion about immigration, because the biggest challenge Scotland faces just now is not too many people, it's too few people in our working age population, and it has been for some considerable time. So by an approach to migration which enables us to boost our working age population, we can improve our capacity to generate wealth within our society and our capacity to invest in the future of our country. So a more sensible, rational approach towards migration, which is one of the issues that I discussed with President von der Leyen when she was in Scotland just about a couple of weeks ago, is about taking that approach and recognising how that will help and stimulate economic growth in our society.
I mean, what were you discussing with Ursula von der Leyen? Like a sort of special Scottish freedom of movement coming back or something?
Well, what I was setting out to President von der Leyen is the position of Scotland, that we were a country that voted to remain in the European Union, and we had Brexit foisted upon us against our will. And I highlighted a number of the challenges that we face, particularly about population, which were significantly addressed by the freedom of movement provisions that existed within the European Union, which we have now lost as a consequence of Brexit.
How many immigrants do you think the Scottish economy needs every year? Do you have a number?
I can't give you a specific number, Adam, but what I can tell you is that in every sector that I speak to, I encounter organisations that are struggling to find enough people to support the activities they're interested in.
Okay, but even though we had that thing called the Boris wave, where like net migration over the last few years went through the roof, like loads of workers have been flooding here. Maybe it's just that they don't want to flood to Scotland.
Well, we've had net migration into Scotland, but it's not been sufficient to deal with the challenges that we face in our working age population.
Do you think the next election might actually just be you versus Reform?
It could well be. I think it's looking increasingly likely, maybe not likely, but it's looking more likely that Reform will be the significant challengers in this election. I think the Conservative Party has absolutely had it in Scotland. I think they're in for a really, really difficult election. The Labour Party is not making headway, and we see the presence of reform.
Now, what is interesting about that is a few years ago, the received wisdom in Scotland and the political elite would be somebody like Nigel Farage, who some people would describe as kind of like an English nationalist, and I'm sure he would dispute that, but that's maybe a kind of a label you could attach to him, would be incredibly unpopular in Scotland. But now you're saying he's probably going to be your principal opponent. So do you think people just kind of got both him and the Scottish public wrong?
I think what's happened is that people are concerned about those issues, about their standard of living, and they are seeking recourse in, an answer like Farage, which I think is absolute folly. And the challenge for me is to make sure that I pull people away from that.
No, but my question was, did you get something wrong about both him and Scottish people? Because I mean, I'm right though. A few years ago, people would be like Nigel Farage. Like if we were having a drink after this show, and I'd said to you, "Oh, Nigel Farage, how's he going to do in Scotland?" You'd say, "Oh no, he's toxic. He's never." This is a made-up conversation, by the way. He's never going to be popular here.
Well, I think a lot has changed in the UK. Like even if you go back in the UK, several years ago, nobody would have been saying Nigel Farage potentially could be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, but they're saying it now.
Do you think he could be?
I think he could. Of course he could be. Of course he could be.
How do you think you'd get on with him?
Not very well.
Well, somebody in the audience saying you said that about Donald Trump several years ago. Can we find some old tweets that you said about Donald Trump that were maybe less nice than your earlier comments?
There's always a tweet, Adam. There's always a tweet.
Oh, good. Speak for yourself. Right. Oh, talking about things that have happened this week, Kate Forbes, your deputy, has announced she's not going to stand in this election we've just been talking about. You sad to see her go?
I am, yes. I tried to persuade her not to go.
Oh, how hard?
Hard.
What tactics did you use?
Well, I was trying to find out if there were ways in which the issues that have led to her decision, which are about her, the challenges of managing parliamentary and ministerial life with family life when you represent a vast part of the Highlands and your constituency and your home are located several hours away from Edinburgh, as to whether there were ways in which we could organise things to try to address and support her in doing that. But she's made
like what? Like flexible working?
Well, yeah, and of course.
Right.
Of course. Why not?
Well, no, I'm not accusing you of like. I'm just intrigued.
Not?
No, I'm intrigued because actually you hear a lot of politicians saying, "Oh, actually, it's really hard to balance family life and work." And I'm just intrigued about actually when two politicians in a room are talking about that, what sort of solutions you come up with?
Well, that's the type of solutions that we're talking about, and how it might be organised in a way that would suit her better. But fundamentally, let me give you an example. I was up in the Highlands a few weeks ago, and I was making a couple of visits, one on just over the constituency boundary from Kate's seat and one in Kate's seat. When I left my first commitment to drive to the commitment in Kate's seat, we drove for 3 hours and we weren't even at the extremity of her constituency. So, I've got some colleagues who could drive from one end of their constituency to the other in 10 minutes. And so it's a very different undertaking, the type of area that Kate is representing and the distance from Edinburgh and the demands of ministerial life. Now, Kate's been a superb contributor to my government. I would have liked her to have carried on, but I have to respect the fact that she's made a very personal choice and to accept that she's made that decision and to wish her well. Right,
that's. Do you think Kate Forbes was resigning because she doesn't feel hopeful about the SNP's future and the Scottish Government's future?
No, I don't think that at all.
Right. It was definitely just personal reasons.
Well, that's what she and I have talked about for some time.
Sure. Also, talking about other personal things, Nicola Sturgeon's going to be on Newscast next week talking about her book, and it's a very, very personal book. Are you okay with her publishing a book with great fanfare and kind of like raking over lots of old history?
Well, of course, Nicola is free to publish a book. I don't know the contents of it, so it'll be, I'm sure, an interesting read, and I'll no doubt be able to dip into it on Newscast.
Will you read it? Because you're going on holiday soon, aren't you, for a few days? Holiday reading?
No, I'm not going on holiday for a few days. I'm working in the Western Isles.
Oh,
for
sorry.
7 days.
Because you were saying when I met you, I'm off to the West. I assumed you were going on holiday because it's August.
No,
You're working.
No, sorry.
But at least you've got a 3-hour journey.
Well, exactly. There were plenty of time for reading. Plenty of time.
Sorry, I accused you of having a holiday.
Exactly.
What a terrible assumption to make. Right, we're drawing to a close. You mentioned earlier on your love of music. We raided the archives and we found this initially quite weird, but then it's quite catchy song. And I think we can we play it? Here we go.
He's your Messiah, in Save the nation with John Swinney. See the babies, they're so skinny. Feed the nation with John Swinney.
Yeah, quite hard to hear it on the stage, but yeah, it's a song dedicated to you. Can you tell us about the provenance of that song? Do you know it?
I think it was something in around the let me just think, probably early 1980s, I would think. Somewhere around about there.
How did it end up? You know the song, though.
It's produced by what I think would pass as a sort of punk band from Edinburgh.
Right.
Of sort of community associates that I had at the time.
Okay, this is so intriguing. Like, it seems to me like there's a sort of untold story here, and you don't really want to tell it.
It was just produced by a bunch of punk artists, you know?
Called the Nocturnal Vermin.
Nocturnal Vermin, yeah. Well, you seem to know more about it, so, you know.
That's because my colleague Miranda's messaging me right now. I don't know, don't worry, we're not going to bring them out.
Thank goodness. Heaven knows what, but every so often I hear somebody from Nocturnal Vermin being interviewed on radio about its contents.
Are they quite famous?
No.
No, they're not.
No. I think it was a BBC interview I heard, and I think they had to search long and hard to find anybody that would admit to any responsibility for that track.
So it's not like there was this quite grungy punk band in the 80s called Nocturnal Vermin, and actually one of them is now really famous.
No, I don't think that.
Sorry.
I don't think they could be accused of being very famous. No, I don't think so at all.
I also, as I'm talking about it, as if they're going to come in and it's like Bono from U2 was actually in this band that wrote the song about it. That's definitely not happening. Just on another note, yesterday somebody messaged because I was wearing American flag socks, and I was like, oh, the thing about doing a live show is people can see your socks. So on the way out of the theatre yesterday, I passed a shop that sells novelty socks, and I bought some Loch Ness Monster socks.
Excellent.
Do you think the Loch Ness Monster exists?
For tourism promotion purposes, yes. In reality, no.
So you've never seen it.
I have never seen it. No.
It's an interesting
But
thing.
I am quite prepared, in the interests of economic development and tourism attraction in Scotland, to engage in lengthy conversation about the veracity of the story, just to make sure it keeps going.
But I suppose that is the amazing, and you feel that. I mean, you feel that in Edinburgh in Fringe time. Like this Scotland story is a lot of that stuff. And it's also like punk from the 1980s, and it's Brian Cox coming from Succession on HBO to do a play at the National Theatre of Scotland. It's like it's a very multi-layered story, isn't it, this country?
It is, and there is, yes, this incredible intensity and diversity of activity that's going on in Edinburgh just now across all sorts of genres, and it's absolutely magnificent and welcome. But then also at other times in the year, you will have amazing other events around about the country. As a family, we holiday in Tiree. There's a Tiree Music Festival, which is essentially, a traditional Scottish music festival. But when I think about what Scottish traditional music was like when I was growing up, it was a sort of old man's industry. Now it is, it attracts thousands of young people with dynamic bands, Skipnish, Skerryvore, Manran, Tidelines, all these different bands who have transformed the perception of traditional Scottish music and how it's presented to the world. And Skerryvore are currently in the States, playing to large audiences, hugely successful band, anchored in Scottish traditional music. So, and that's just one aspect. There'll also be literary events around the country and other dramatic productions around the country. So, I think what it says to me, and this is really precious to me, the cultural identity of Scotland is deeply set within our roots as a country, but it's also able to be a strong connection to the world and gives multiple reasons why people should come to Scotland.
I'm going to do a good version and a bad version of that from my point of view. The good version, it was amazing seeing Spider-Man, which is filming in Glasgow right now, and they did the swinging for real. Yeah. So it's a stuntman dressed as Spider-Man on the back of a truck swinging between the buildings, and Glasgow's my old hometown. So, my hometown, you have a hometown, don't you? It's where I grew up. So seeing Spider-Man swinging between those buildings, amazing. Did you know that was going to happen?
Yeah, it's been filmed there, but we didn't know. I saw exactly the film piece you're talking about, and it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And you recognise the buildings, and you think, you walk up and down these streets, and you think, oh my goodness, this is so familiar. And then you see this really quite, very, very unusual experience seeing it in front of you.
And I was actually tempted to nip over to Glasgow to watch it, but I thought, no, I'll stay in Edinburgh and enjoy the French and do Newscast. And then the more negative bit of feedback I was going to give culturally, I went to the National Gallery of Scotland this morning with my hour off, and great artwork there. They have taken, though, that famous painting, Monarch of the Glen, of the big stag? Mm-hmm. You probably recognise it. Outside on the TV, they've got an AI animated version of it where it basically is talking. It says, come and see me on the second floor. And I was like, okay, I'm now a bit more of an AI skeptic than I was yesterday.
But then possibly the next version of that is Nessie.
Well, there we go.
That might be the next step to take forward.
And that is your policy, that Nessie both exists and doesn't exist simultaneously.
With the help of AI.
With the help of AI, which could help the Scottish economy to boom. If only there were enough immigrants to work in it.
Exactly.
Right. First Minister, thank you so much for your time today. I know having read Nicola Sturgeon's book, I know an hour of First Minister's time is very valuable. So thanks for sharing it with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.